The wind cut across the plains like a blade, carrying dust, anger, and a silence that felt heavier than gunfire. People said Elijah Crow had a temper shaped by grief and a heart buried beneath scars. They were wrong about one thing: his heart was not buried. It was awake, furious, and waiting. Before this story truly begins, take 1 second, subscribe to our channel, share this story with your friends, because stories like this remind us that justice can still be built by human hands. Elijah had not come to the county auction to buy cattle. He had come to sell a portion of his land and be done with a world he no longer trusted. But when the auctioneer's voice shifted tone, lower, colder, the air changed. 4 young women were brought forward, standing close, hands clenched together as if separating would shatter them. They were sisters, not children but barely into adulthood, faces worn by hunger, eyes sharpened by fear. Their uncle stood behind them, smiling like a man who believed the world existed only to feed his greed. He called them assets, said their parents' debt belonged to him now, said the law looked the other way, the crowd murmured. Some turned their heads, others calculated. Elijah felt something snap inside him. He didn't raise his hand when the bidding started. He waited, let the numbers climb, let the uncle's grin widen. Then, when the final bid rang out, Elijah stood. His voice didn't shout. It didn't need to, "I'll take them." Silence crashed down. The hammer fell, and history shifted its first inch. The sisters expected chains. They expected labor, cruelty, another cage with a different owner's name. What they did not expect was the long drive north, the gates opening onto rolling land, and Elijah stopping the truck before the ranch house. "You're not property here," he said, not turning around. "You're safe." They didn't believe him. Safety had lied to them before. He gave them keys, rooms, food that didn't come with conditions, work only if they chose it. He hired lawyers who worked quietly and relentlessly, unearthing records, debts forged, laws bent. The uncle vanished into courtrooms and cells. Still, the sisters flinched at loud sounds, slept in the same room, spoke in whispers. Elijah watched from a distance, learning something he had forgotten, that anger could be used like fire, not to burn but to forge. Months passed. One sister began painting again, colors spilling onto old barn walls. Another studied veterinary books at night. One learned the land, the fences, the rhythm of horses. The youngest, though still an adult, learned to laugh, softly at first, like testing a fragile bridge. And then the fire came, a lightning strike, dry grass, wind screaming like the past returning to claim its due. Elijah fought it with the ranch hands, smoke filling his lungs, flames chasing memory. When he collapsed, it was the sisters who dragged him clear. It was their hands that saved the man who had saved them. When the ashes cooled, half the ranch was gone, but what rose from it would outlive them all. Elijah rebuilt differently, not just barns and fences, but a place, a refuge. He donated land, built housing, training halls, clinics. He named it not after himself, but after the sister's mother, whose name the uncle had tried to erase. Survivors came from everywhere, women and men broken by systems that sold silence as law. The sisters ran it. They spoke publicly, took the stand, faced crowds that once would have terrified them. Their voices shook, then steadied, then changed laws. Elijah watched from the back, hat low, eyes wet. He never called himself a hero. He called himself a man who finally listened to his anger and aimed it right. Years later, children played where the auction block once stood, moved stone by stone to the center of the refuge as a reminder, not of shame, but of survival. When Elijah died, the land did not go to heirs. It went to history, and the sisters stood together again, not clinging this time but strong. 4 pillars holding up something the world said couldn't be built. Justice. The first night at the ranch did not feel like freedom. Freedom was loud in stories, bright and sudden. This place was quiet, almost painfully so, and quiet had never meant safety to them before. The sisters slept on the floor of the same room, blankets pulled tight, backs pressed together. The beds Elijah had prepared remained untouched, as if lying on them would invite punishment. Every sound, the creak of old wood, the sigh of wind against glass, made muscles tense. No one spoke after the lantern was blown out. They breathed together, counting each other's inhales like a fragile promise that none of them had disappeared. At dawn, the oldest sister woke first. Her name was Mara. She rose slowly, heart hammering, expecting a door to burst open, a voice to shout orders. Instead, sunlight spilled across the floor, gentle and unreal. Outside, horses moved like shadows through mist. She stepped onto the porch barefoot. The land stretched farther than fear. Hills rolled outward, fences cutting clean lines through green and gold. It was too open to be a trap, too honest. Elijah was already awake, repairing a gate with deliberate, steady movements. He nodded once when he saw her, then went back to work. No stare, no command, just space. That unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. By mid-morning, the others followed. Elena, sharp-eyed and silent, Ruth, whose hands shook when she thought no one noticed, and Lila, who tried hardest to look brave and failed the most honestly. Elijah set food on the table and left the room. Not a gesture of kindness, but of respect. They ate like fugitives, fast and quiet. Days passed like this. No demands, no ledger. Elijah spoke only when necessary, and when he did, his words were plain. He showed them where tools were kept, where water ran clean, where the boundaries of the land lay. He told them they could leave at any time. That was the lie they waited to collapse, but it didn't. Instead, the world pushed back. A man from town arrived uninvited, hat tipped too low, questions dressed as concern. He asked what Elijah planned to do with the girls. Elijah's reply was calm, but his eyes hardened. "They're not for doing." The man laughed uneasy. "You paid for them." Elijah stepped closer. "I paid to stop something." Word spread. Some called Elijah noble. Others called him dangerous. The sheriff came next, polite but probing. Papers were examined. Records questioned. Elijah had expected this. He handed over documents, receipts, legal filings already in motion. He had not bought them to hide them. He had bought them to end something openly. Still, nights remained heavy. Ruth woke screaming from dreams where chains returned. Elena paced the fences like a caged animal. Lila flinched whenever Elijah raised his voice at a horse. Mara watched everything, measuring exits. Then the storm came. A black wall rose on the horizon, thunder tearing the sky apart. Wind slammed into the ranch like an accusation. One of the younger horses broke loose, panicked, bolting toward the ravine. Without thinking, Elena ran. The sisters shouted after her, fear screaming louder than reason. Elijah followed, boots pounding mud, rain blinding. The horse slipped near the edge, hooves skidding, terror wild in its eyes. Elena reached it first, hands shaking but firm, voice low and steady. She spoke nonsense, words without meaning but full of calm. The horse stilled, trembling. Elijah arrived seconds later, Gra. He bed the reins, anchored them both. When it was over, Elena collapsed into the mud, sobbing, not from fear, but release. Elijah stood soaked and silent, then did something unexpected. He knelt. "You saved him," he said. "Not good job. Not thank you. Saved." Something cracked open then. After that, things shifted. Ruth began helping in the kitchen, then the fields. Her hands steadied when she worked with soil. Lila started riding, laughter breaking free in sharp, surprised bursts. Mara helped Elijah with paperwork, her mind sharp, relentless, uncovering inconsistencies in the uncle's claims that even the lawyers had missed. Elijah watched them become themselves again, piece by piece. He never interfered, never directed. He protected the perimeter and let the center heal. But healing attracts enemies. One night, the barn was set ablaze. Flames roared against the dark, cruel and deliberate. Someone wanted to remind Elijah, and the sisters, that defiance had a price. Elijah ran toward the fire without hesitation. The sisters followed. They formed a line with buckets, coughing through smoke, eyes burning. The fire took part of the structure before rain finally slowed it. When dawn came, the barn stood scarred but standing. The message was clear. So was Elijah's response. That morning, he made calls that reached far beyond the county. Investigators arrived. Journalists followed. The auction was exposed. Names were printed. The uncle's past unraveled in public, thread by filthy thread. The sisters stood together when the first reporter asked questions. They did not hide. And Elijah, watching from behind them, realized something that made his chest ache harder than any fire. They were no longer survivors waiting to be rescued. They were becoming something else, and the world was about to feel it. The trial did not begin in a courtroom. It began in the cyst. Bodies, tight shoulders, shallow breaths, the way silence stretched too long before anyone spoke. Justice was supposed to be loud, but this part was quiet and terrifying. When the subpoenas arrived, Lila cried first, not loudly, just tears sliding down as she folded the paper again and again until it softened in her hands. Ruth went pale, then angry. Elena said nothing at all. Mara read every line twice, jaw set, eyes sharp. Elijah did not tell them what to do. He only said, "Whatever you choose, I'll stand where you stand." That mattered more than any promise. The town changed its tone once cameras arrived. Smiles turned stiff, doors closed early. People who had once looked away now wanted absolution through proximity. The sisters were invited to speak at churches, councils, radio shows. Some listened, some only watched. On the first day of testimony, the uncle did not look at them. He stared straight ahead, as if their existence was an inconvenience, not a crime. His lawyer spoke of debts, agreements, legality. Mara stood. Her voice shook for exactly 3 sentences. Then it steadied. She spoke of nights without food, of being counted like inventory, of being told love was a debt they owed. She did not cry, she did not shout. She simply told the truth until the courtroom could no longer pretend it hadn't heard. One by one the sisters followed. Ruth spoke of fear so constant it became a second skin. Elena spoke of rage she swallowed so it wouldn't consume her. Lila spoke last, voice small but unbroken, about how she had stopped imagining a future because it hurt too much. When it ended, the uncle finally looked at them. And for the first time he looked afraid. The verdict came swiftly. Guilty did not sound loud enough, but it echoed. Outside, reporters swarmed, microphones pressed close, questions flew like stones. The sisters stood shoulder to shoulder, hands linked, not because they needed to hold each other up anymore, but because they chose to. Elijah stayed back, hat low, watching something he had never seen before. Survival turning into authority. The threats came after. Letters, calls, a bullet fired into the dirt near the fence one night. Elijah doubled security, but the sisters refused to hide. Instead, Mara proposed something that changed everything. Let's build something they can't burn down. They didn't start with buildings. They started with laws. Mara worked with advocates to close loopholes that had allowed the auction to exist. Elena trained with investigators, learning how trafficking networks hid behind paperwork. Ruth partnered with counselors, designing programs that treated trauma like an injury, not a weakness. Lila began speaking to survivors, her softness becoming a bridge others could cross. Elijah donated land, then more. Construction crews arrived. Cabins rose, a clinic, classrooms, a long hall with windows facing the open plains. They named it after their mother, whose name had been nearly erased but now stood carved in stone. The night before opening, a storm rolled in, heavy, loud, familiar. Lightning struck dry grass beyond the ridge. Fire raced toward the new buildings. Elijah ran first, shouting orders, fighting wind and flame. The sisters followed without hesitation. They had buckets, hoses, shovels. Smoke burned their eyes. Heat clawed at their skin. A beam collapsed. Elijah shoved Lila clear and took the impact himself. Pain dropped him to one knee. The world narrowed to noise and flame. Then hands grabbed him, all 4 sisters. They pulled him back together, coughing, fierce, unstoppable. The fire slowed. Rain came like mercy. When dawn broke, the building still stood, smoke-scarred but alive. Elijah sat on the steps, blood on his sleeve, watching the sisters move among volunteers, directing repairs, comforting the shaken. No fear in their voices now, no hesitation. He laughed once quietly, the sound rough and amazed. "You built this," he said. Mara shook her head. "We all did." Years passed. The refuge became a model. Laws changed across counties, then states. Survivors arrived broken and left standing taller. Children played where fear once ruled. The sisters aged into leaders, mentors, legends spoken of without pity. Elijah grew slower. His anger softened into something warm and steady. When he died, the funeral drew crowds that stretched beyond the horizon. The sisters buried him beneath an old oak overlooking the land. No speeches, no grand words, just 4 women standing where history had tried to end them, and failed. What Elijah bought that day was not ownership, it was time, and what they built with it changed the world.